Good morning and welcome to Sunday, one of the best days of the week, because on this day we can assemble ourselves together and we're listening to the counsel of the book of Hebrews, and forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Guess what we're getting closer to? The day of the Lord. So it becomes more and more important, more and more incumbent upon us to get ourselves together with God's people. Get to church. Don't be a creaster. I'm grateful for people who come, Christmas and Easter, but that's a start. That's an intro. That's where you can start kicking the tires. Jump in. Become committed and attend every week. Get involved every week. Do devotions every week. Pray every day. Pray in the Spirit every morning when you get up. Spend time in the Word and in prayer. Spend time with God's people, imperfect that we are, incomplete that we are, full of hypocrisy and unfinished products as we are. Lumps of clay with junk that needs to be removed and stuff that needs to be put in. It's through that connection with one another and the grace of God, being people of faith, that we move into the fullness of God's grace for our life. So let's jump right in. We've noticed as we've been looking at meditations in Hebrews here in the 11th chapter, this is the faith chapter. It begins with those great words. Well, not exactly begins, but about the 6th verse. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. For those that come to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those that diligently seek Him. That sounds a whole lot like work. It sounds like effort. And it sounds like effort and work on our part. You know why? Because it is. Trusting, confiding, staying solid, hanging in there, all of that is something that we have to take the step on. Now here's the great news. God meets us there when we step out for Him. And He meets us with His great grace. As we believe, we receive grace, because God gives, here's what James says, God gives grace to the humble, but the prideful, He resists the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. We hear, I think, the Magnificat of Mary that talks about, you have sent the rich and the prideful away. They're the ones that don't receive, they don't get connected with your great grace. So, we've been looking at two sides of the coin, the positivistic side, which are people who have seen amazing deliverances. They have seen great victories in battle. They have had great resources of money. They have had palaces. They have been the head of the kingdom. They have seen glory days. We've also seen people who were cut in half, thrown in prison, lived in a hole in the ground, destitute, with either goat skins or sheep skins on. The world is not worthy of them, the scripture says. They also are people of faith, because they're looking for a city whose builder and maker is God. They're looking for a resurrection, and they couldn't be doing that and in their time and in their era be doing what has been described in the positive side of it. The big, great, amazing stories of triumph in a tangible way, which translated to ships of gold and palaces and building a temple in Jerusalem and some of the big, high, epic moments on the planet. There has also been some times in prison, sawn in two, wandering destitute, living in a hole in the ground. And we've been told that the earth is not worthy of these people. The world is not worthy of them. Why? Because they are great people of faith. So with that in the background of our thinking, with that twofold, that two-sided coin, serving in our foundational thinking about faith and receiving through our faith and what grace looks like in our life, we can then sum it up. This whole chapter kind of comes in for a landing here in 11 here, verses 39 and 40, and now we'll close out with that and finish out the 11th chapter of Hebrews. These were all commended for their faith. Both sides of the coin. David, Samuel, Jephthah, Moses, Abraham, all the way through saints who shall be named later, because we don't know their names. We just know what they did. They wandered about in sheepskin or goatskin. They lived in a hole in the ground, destitute. Who are they? They are great heroes. They're as heroic as Solomon, as heroic as David. They're living off the other side of that coin, depending upon their epoch, their era, their time upon the earth, and what is required of them in order to reflect the kingdom. These were all commended for their faith. Now, this binds them all together. Positivistic or negativistic. Head side of the coin, tail side of the coin, isn't it? Heads you win, tails you lose. There were some people who lived on the head side. There were people who lived on the tail side. They were all commended for their faith, yet none of them, not David, not Samuel, not Abraham, not Isaac, not Jacob, not the prophets that have books named after them, and not those that were saints who shall be named later. They're anonymous in the book. We don't know their name. None of them received what had been promised. None of them received what had been promised. Abraham looked for a city whose builder and maker was God. He never received it. David was looking for things. He saw the Melchizedek priesthood. He saw the kingdom, the king and priest being put together. Zechariah saw the king and the priest being put together. But it didn't happen in their day. They died in faith. They died looking forward. None of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us. Better for us. Who is the us that he's talking about? Those that are living in the last age of man. That's you and I, and that was these believers, these Hebrew believers, who were wrestling. They're thinking about abandoning some claims about Christ and rejoining their countrymen and rejoining their families and finding peace with their families instead of the sword that Jesus promised. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Wow. They were all looking forward to the Messiah. They were all looking forward to the promise of the perfect sacrifice, the one who would come and crush the serpent's head. And when did this happen? Galatians says, in the fullness of time. The Essene community would see it as the final age of man. The final age of man. Where do we find ourselves? After the cross, the death, the burial, the resurrection and ascension of Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah of God. And now what do? We live by faith. God has planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they, who? Abraham, Samuel, David, Solomon, Jephthah, Barak, Deborah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah, Malachi, together with the disciples of the Lord. Many of them, most of them, a super majority of them, an incredible millions of numbers of them from every tribe and nation, every color of skin, every color of eyes, every color and texture of hair, every height variation, every language, every background, that all together we would be made perfect. And how does that perfection come about? How does that completion come about? Regardless of what side of the coin you need to live on as you live out your life upon the earth, you become a person of faith. For without faith it is impossible to please God. He who comes to him must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. We're looking for something. All of us are still looking for completion. Excuse me. What were the Hebrew believers looking for? Completion. But they were running the risk of playing out again the big vote against Moses and the spies, who said, we can go into the land. We can inherit the promises of God, the fullness of the promise of God. But they voted, a super majority of them voted and said, nah, he got us out of Egypt, but we're not going in. Jesus said, except a man is born again, he cannot see the kingdom, cannot enter the kingdom. Do you see that parallel? A person can be born again and yet ultimately not enter into the perfection, not complete the deal. That's tragic. And the writer of Hebrews is convinced much more of his own people, the ones that he speaks their language, and he's counted amongst their census. And yet today, we need to hear that writer of the book of Hebrews that says, there's something better, and only together with us would they be made perfect. And what does it require? To continually connect into that completing and finishing work of God. Faith. We continue to hold our confidence in God. We continue to believe in his word and believe in his plan, believe in his timing, and believe in him as he has been revealed to us through Jesus the Christ. A lot to think about. A small verse, 2 verses that fit on the same screen, but power-packed and worth our meditation. So Lord bless you. May his grace and peace be upon you as you allow this to soak into your spirit, transform your soul, and change your life. The Lord bless you. We'll see you tomorrow as we move into Hebrews chapter 12.